welcome to the Love Positivism podcast. I'm your host, Shireen, and I'm the creator of Love Positivism. I'm here to help you on your spiritual and healing journey. I am a certified yoga and meditation teacher, a student of Chinese medicine, a doula, a Reiki practitioner, and a passionate, highly sensitive person. I want to use my knowledge to channel information and messages for you to grow on all levels. Hi, and welcome to this week's episode. I hope that you've had a beautiful week with this full moon that we had, and we're shifting so much right now since we have shifted seasons as well, and I can really see that there's a major shift in nature now, and this shifts us within our body, our emotions. So it's a really beautiful time. I love this season, and this is very much a time of starting to go within and reflecting a little bit on everything that's been going on within ourselves throughout this transformative time. And when it gets darker like it is now in the northern hemispheres, we also have permission to step inwards and work a little bit more with our inner being. And I love this time of year, so I hope you're enjoying that, and thank you to everyone who's been listening to the podcast, sharing it and leaving reviews. I'm really grateful. And if you haven't checked out my Instagram and Facebook page, you can just search for it. Just type in Love Positivism. And today I have the beautiful Katie Silcox, who's so inspiring, and I wanted her to come on and talk about Ayurveda, since it's a close sister science with yoga, which I practice a lot. So she's a New York Times best-selling author of the book Healthy, Happy, Sexy Ayurveda Wisdom for Modern Women, and she's also founded the Shakti School, which is a beautiful online and offline school for women with different themes, and she has actually a master's degree in Hinduism and Ayurveda Sciences, so she really knows what she's talking about, and she's a teacher and mentor to women. She's really here to awakening the inner divine feminine within us all. So I really been inspired by her podcast, the G-Spot podcast, that you can find and listen more to her. And in this episode we talk about Ayurveda, but also a lot of other things like nervous system healing, having a highly sensitive trait. If you're a highly sensitive person, you will definitely hear great insights about this. And we talk about yoga and the history of yoga, and also we get into trauma healing and healing the feminine body. And she talks about her Shakti School. And if you enjoy this podcast, please leave a review or just comment. I'd really love to hear how every episode is helping you on your path. It really means everything, and that's why I'm doing this work. So enjoy this week's episode. Hi, Katie. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Hi, I'm excited to be here.
Thank you for joining today. I'm so excited to have you here. And before we start, I always start by asking the question, how do you stay mindful and present in your life?
Yeah, I think for me personally, mindfulness is not an option for me. It's a requirement. It has been the medicine through which I've been able to really access a lot of insight and healing, and in what for me has been a pretty arduous journey of being a human. But we can talk more about methodologies around that, but I would say mindfulness is really not optional at this point.
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I love for you to share who you are. I've been following you and listening to your podcast, which I truly love, for a long time now. So I'm very inspired by you, your work, everything that you're sharing. It's so authentic, and I love the your aspect of healing and of everything that you do. So I would love for you to start by sharing who you are and
Sure.
just what you're doing in the world.
Right. It's a big question.
Yeah.
Well, my name is Katie Silcox. I have been a student of Ayurveda, tantric philosophy, mindfulness, neuroscience, anything related to human potentiality and evolution, and really what I call the lineage of love since I was 18, 19 years old. And so that's over 20 years ago. And I spent, as many of us have done in the spirituality community, I spent a lot of time studying yoga. And what I found was that yoga wasn't healing all my problems. It wasn't giving me all the answers that I needed. And so I began to study Ayurveda. I got a master's degree in Hindu philosophy, and I ended up writing a book called Healthy, Happy, Sexy, which was kind of like a modern gal's primer to the complexity and beautiful simplicity of Ayurvedic medicine and Ayurvedic lifestyle, and really the humble process of learning how nature behaves and attempting to really do my best to align with the seasons and align with the seasons of my own life and align with the ever-changing seasons of my emotions. And so that book, I wrote it about 6 years ago. And now where I am, we have an online school called the Shakti School, and we train women in natural methodologies of self-empowerment. And that ranges from everything from our primary base, which is, of course, Ayurveda, but to everything related to emotional healing, trauma release methodologies, on and on and on. And now where I am right now is really dedicated to learning the ways in which particularly the female body unravels past history and pain in order to really step into pleasure and authenticity, and really what I would say is the feeling of being safe and at home in her body. And that, can be anything, right? There's so many different ways of learning how that works. But my particular passion right now is the nervous system and how that's really the root mother of everything. If your nervous system is out of whack, it doesn't matter what herbs you take. It doesn't matter what, foods you eat. It is the root of the problem and the root of the solution. So that's a small that's a small taste.
I have like 1,000 questions now.
Sure, good.
I love that. So
Yeah.
the maybe we can start by explaining a little bit shortly about
Sure.
Ayurveda for those that
Yeah.
might not know exactly what it is.
Let's do that. So broadly speaking, Ayurveda means life wisdom, the way the means by which life has chosen to express itself. And in nature, of course, through science and biology and all of the sciences, really, we understand that nature has fairly predictable patterns, although with global warming that's shifting slightly, but nature has predictable patterns. And just like you and I have very predictable patterns, we know what it looks like to be a baby, a teenager, an adult, and an old person, like whether we like it or not, right? Eventually these patterns are going to win. And so Ayurveda, broadly speaking, is just the flow of nature. And then specifically speaking, Ayurveda is a form of holistic health that emerged, some say 5 to 2,000 years ago in India, in the Indus Valley. and was really the first written history of humans' relationship to nature and really spirit. And so Ayurveda has this ancient tradition in India, but broadly speaking, it is the wisdom of Mother Nature in every tradition, in every country, in every human body, whether it be called Ayurveda, the Tao, the flow, whatever we want to call this, good science is Ayurveda. That's the short definition.
I love that. And I just last week had an episode with acupuncturist, since I'm also studying Chinese medicine, and yeah, that's also the science of nature and
Exactly.
understanding the macrocosm and the microcosm. It's so healing, and it's so great that it's emerging again now, and so many more
Right.
people are interested in that. And
Right.
how did your work? I've been listening to you for years, but how, maybe you want to talk about how you started working, because Shakti School, that's like, it's so immersed in the feminine also aspect, right? And I'm thinking about your work with the female health,
Right.
yeah, all of that.
Why so much women?
Yeah, like how did you get
Yeah.
into that?
Oh
Because
my goodness.
it's so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I wrote my second book is in the process right now, and it's really answers that question. So everyone hopefully can read this later. But
Yeah.
my answer to the question today is I was so passionately involved in my yoga life, in my yoga practice, in my yoga career. I was a teacher. I traveled all over the globe teaching what later I began to feel was a very male, and I use that word intentionally, a male dominated system inherited in a way that most people were unaware of through the male body for male in goals, and primarily given to us by male teachers. And yet, as if we look at Europe and we look at the United States and we look at several other countries, statistically what we can see is that primarily these male dominated systems were being practiced by women. And so I began to question that. I began to question and really start to get real about what was happening in my own body, and why, if I was doing 1 to 2 hours of intense mantras and yogic breath work and asanas, why did I feel that I was getting further and further from my goal of health, and my goal of love, and my goal of ease? Why was I getting further away the more I practiced? And it was a really big turning point in my life, and it was incredibly painful because I had built this huge ego identity and structure and even a business around being this thing that wasn't working for me anymore, and sometimes like dramatically not working for me. And I talk about this in the book. The month I was on the cover of the Yoga Journal in Russia and headlining the Yoga Journal conference at Russia, that month prior, I had been in the hospital with a nervous system. Basically, my nervous system just collapsed. And so it was this real reckoning of like, what is going on deep within my psyche and deep within my body that's calling for help? And I began to study with nervous system experts. I began to study with somatic experiencing therapists. I began to learn about the nature of attachment and trauma. And I began to just see that my little being was longing for good mothering and the feminine and the divine masculine as well. I needed to be loved and parented by myself in a way that simply meditating on a mantra or meditating on a chakra or meditating on silence, it wasn't healing the wounded part of me that needed the divine mother and the divine father and the love and compassion and really relational attachment with a teacher that had that capacity to be right? Like a loving presence in my life. And so, I mean, I obviously I've written a 500-page book about this, so I could talk forever, but in short, and I began to see also, Shireen, that the way in which I was moving my body, even in yoga, was not natural to my curvy, bootylicious, feminine form that loves to be curvaceous and to move in circles and to dance intuitively. And this isn't to say that, you know, all yoga poses are bad or wrong, not at all. But the way that I was imposing upon my body began to be unbearable. And so it completely, you know, over the past 5, 6, 7 years, I've been on that evolutionary journey. And when I began to speak honestly about it, what I found was like women all around me were just crying. Like, yes, I've been feeling this too. And I've been too scared to say anything.
Yeah.
So here we are now. And I'm certainly not the first woman in the yoga world to feel this way. That's for sure. There have been many other amazing teachers who are preaching the same gospel.
Yeah, I can so much relate to that because my practice has become much more softer and more feminine, like so much more since I started. And it's we can't forget that the physical practice was basically a lot of masculine practices from the beginning, this dynamic and straight and very like linear type of practice, and that it's a beautiful thing to learn, and then we can also adapt it and to understand that certain poses I can't do. It's just, it doesn't feel good for my body, so why should I? If it's good for someone else, it might not be good for me. So we have to really listen and not like force the body to do something that is unnatural. And then what is unnatural for the female body with the cycles is that we can't perform. We can't perform and do the exact same thing. Even me as a teacher, my teaching is very dependent on where I'm in the cycle. So I'm trying to do things that are appropriate right then, and I want to be able to show what I'm teaching, so I'm not doing any poses that are not suitable for that part of my cycle, whichever phase it is. And I'm super honest with the students that, okay, now I'm in this stage and I'm really gonna take it slow today, or now I'm more energetic. So I think that's really being in touch with yourself.
Exactly. And it's not to say that the feminine form, I call the work that I do feminine form. The feminine form does not just lay around and, you know, do circular movements and look like a goddess dancing, you know, on a hilltop. No. Sometimes my yoga practice looks like going on a run and punching the air with my fists and getting angry and like dancing like a wild woman. You know, like you can also be fierce and ferocious. And I think if anything, yoga was too tame for what the wildness that needed to come out of my body. For so many women, we've had our anger tamped down. And so to actually like, let's go out in the woods and just like run around and like push our bodies into trees. Like, let's do some push-ups. Like, let's get fiery. And then, as you said, when it's my menstrual time, I do nothing at all. I lay around like a fat cat and I love it. You know?
I love that. Yeah, it's so important. And I think it's really so in like you said, for example, when I'm teaching prenatal yoga, like we do things there that are crazy, like really screaming and doing these voice practices that it would be really like weird to do in a practice with I don't know, it wouldn't make sense. We're using in Swedish we call it like the original power, like urkraft. It's like the power of the earth, because in birth,
I love that word.
Urkraft. It's like it's like using the voice to channel that. So it's really powerful. It's not like a soft kitten. It's like really
No.
powerful. So yeah, I totally agree with that. And also I would love to hear what type of, because the nervous system, yeah, it is so important, and we work with that in yoga, we work with that in these holistic practices. And one thing that I've noticed in myself is to have a very sensitive nervous system.
Yes.
Like it can be really tough out in the world. So maybe
Yes.
you can talk about your story about that.
Oh,
Yeah.
we need to like have a whole, yeah. First of all, I am so happy to be speaking with someone from another country, and just we've been in lockdown, all of us. So it's nice just to hear your Udkraft. I'm saying it, Udkraft. Like, I love just being in connection with you, and I feel this sense of family with all of the women and men all over the world that are sensitive, and I think so many of us come to yoga and meditation because, about 20% of the planet, and there may be more now, are highly sensitive people. And in the ancient times, we would have been revered as priestesses and oracles and preachers, and, like the sensitive plant listeners. And like, we would have been cared for in a different way than we are now. And so much of our society is really focused on the non-sensitive. And so the nervous system for a highly sensitive person is our greatest gift, but it's also can be very challenging. And what I'm about to say, it's like a new and slightly radical way of seeing our spiritual practice or our yoga. And that is yoga. And, I talk about this in some of my other podcasts, that most people are not aware that the asanas and many of the practices that we in the West have inherited, we think they are these ancient Indian sacred spiritual things, when really it's been this amalgamation of historical combinations from all over the world, particularly Europe and India, and the way in which particularly Northern European women influenced English army moves that were then taken through colonialization to India, where they were then mixed with more of the pranayamas and the mantras and the spiritual disciplines of what was called Hinduism, but really was called the Sanatana Dharma. Now, I say all of this to say, please, those of you listening, don't think that just because you're in a yoga class, you're doing some 5,000-year-old sacred practice. There are some aspects of yoga that's why it's really important to have a teacher that comes from a deep and rich lineage. But on that point, in regard to the nervous system, what is not popular, and I'm not a very popular voice some of the time, because I am saying what I believe to be true about the historical legacy of the poses and some of the practices that we're imposing on women's bodies. If we look historically at where these poses, particularly the ones that are held for long periods of time and some of the more intense forms of breath work, we find it is historically shown that they come from the male bodies of ascetics who were living in caves and in the woods, who wanted to suppress the sensory system. It was called pratyahara. And they would do that, and that has dramatic physiological effects on the body that over time ends up shutting down your circulatory system, your valve system, your brain, your spinal cord. And that most people aren't aware of that. And so there's a great book on this people can read, some of what I'm speaking of, called The Science of Yoga. We think that the yoga is good for all bodies all the time, but what yoga actually is doing, it's lowering our blood pressure, it's lowering our metabolism, and it's doing a lot of other things. Most women I know do not need their heart rate decreased. They do not need their blood pressure lowered. They do not need their body temperature decreased. And they certainly don't need their metabolism decreased. And that's what most of the yoga practiced in the West is doing to the physiological system. Now, if you want those scientific quote benefits, do yoga. They're really great for men who are high blood pressure,
Yeah.
like overdoing it. And so, but the women that I know, we need to wake up our blood pressure. We need to wake
Yeah.
up our metabolism. And so I could go on and on and on about this, but I think it's why so many people in the yoga world have digestive problems. And so all this to say, the nervous system actually oftentimes for many of the people that are already attracted to yoga, their nervous system may actually need to activate and not deactivate. In other words, upregulate and be comfortable with upregulation and be able to downregulate. And so it's very complex, and we could do a whole hour on like fight, flight, freeze and the dynamics of what practices, kind of build or decrease these things. But it's very complicated. And that's why we need to be working with teachers who understand the nervous system, who understand the female endocrinology, who understand the female psychology, especially those of us who've undergone traumatic events, which, by the way, is 1 in every 2 women. So I think you can sense my love and passion for this.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. And yes, I want to recommend your episode when you talk about the history also of yoga. I listened to that one, and like how there's a lot of misconceptions, and these things, and also in particular the trauma aspect is so important.
So big.
Yeah, it's so big. I think most of us have experienced something, and then and then that grows within us if we like, we're not aware of it, but it's something that sits there. So it's so beautiful that you're working. You mentioned that in the beginning, that you work with also trauma healing in Shakti School. Maybe you can talk about that, like what type of things do you do there?
Absolutely. Well, first I want to say that we usually lay down these traumatic patterns in relationship. And therefore, even if it wasn't trauma is healed in relationship. And so the idea of a yogi sitting alone on a mountaintop healing his trauma is not one that I've found of course we need both. We need to be able to self-regulate, which is the goal of yoga and meditation. And we need to be able to co-regulate. And that means being in relationship with someone else. But when it comes to early childhood trauma, most traumas lay down between the ages of 0 and 14. That's when our brain, it's something in our brain called our nucleus bacillus. That's when all those patterns are formed. And so it's almost virtually impossible to heal patterns of early trauma through solitary pursuit. So at Shakti School, when we speak of these things that I taught yesterday on some of the methodologies that we use, I preface it all by saying it's so important to have support. And whether that be a trusted therapist or a friend, for me, it's been having a therapist in my life. And I work in a modality. I worked with a woman called Alicia Farhado. She has something called the Farhado Method, working with the nervous system, which I could not recommend more. Currently I'm working with a therapist in the field of somatic release work. And we really encourage people to, if you are having, if you sense that you're just kind of never feeling good, the nervous system always is feeling like a little out of whack, like I really recommend people working with someone one-on-one. But what we do in Shakti School is I teach women how to meditate and be in their bodies in a way that's radically different from what I was ever taught in my own meditation and yogic studies. We do a lot of focus on the senses, on using the sense of touch, taste, smell, sight, on actually meditating outside of our body before we just dive into our body, which can be a place of a lot of injury and insult and challenge. And so we learn how to go inside and outside. We also work with. Last night we did a whole thing around parts work, and so there's a great book called Self Therapy. There's another book called Parts Work. I don't know the authors off the top of my head, but your listeners, if they're like, oh my God, this is so me, I need to know more, check out Somatic Experiencing. There's a book called Waking the Tiger, which I think should be on every single yogi's book list. There's another book called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, and I recommend these books to my students. But at the same time, there are things that we can do together in groups, of working with all these little different parts of ourselves that oftentimes are not the age that you are right now. They're a lot younger, and they need and very much want to express and experience anger. They very much need and want to reveal fear and sadness. They need to have these expressions, and they need to be attended to. And so this is sort of the method we use to meditate, right? We cultivate that sense of the wise woman, the wise witness, the good parent inside of ourselves. And that's who we become identified with. And then now that we have that anchor point of the wise woman, now we can start to interface with all these little parts of ourselves that feel really crappy, that most people don't want to work with, because as one of my teachers says, it feels like you're eating a shit sandwich, right? To go into these painful emotions. And let me just say one more thing about just going back to this overarching understanding of the way we approach yoga and meditation. I hope all the listeners are hearing, I am not anti-yoga. I'm not anti-meditation. I'm merely suggesting that a lot of what we are experiencing as yoga practitioners in the West is what's called a top-down approach. I'm going to put my body into a position. I'm going to focus on evening out my breath. And I may even align my body in a way that the top is going to tell the bottom what to do. And that's really good. We need to be able to have that executive functioning and prefrontal cortex online. But we also need to have a bottom-up approach. So we don't tell the body to do anything. We don't put it in any position. We merely pay attention and let the body reveal to us what the medicine is. And the body will reveal movements, sensations, images, thoughts even, that will be medicine for us that the top-down approach could never have imagined. And so it's this difference between what I call masculine top-down versus feminine bottom-up. And just as the yin and yang, Shiva Shakti symbology, we must have both. But most of us have only received one side. So we're a little bit atrophied on the other side.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
It's really important. And I'm also thinking about just another thing that you talk about and share a lot, and it's this path of love, or Bhakti. And what is that to you? Like,
yeah, it's everything. It's everything. You know, and you can hear and feel in me, like there's so much love, but there's also a lot of fire. And so Bhakti doesn't mean that we become this lovey-dovey doormat that just, no matter what happens to her, she just stays in this passive loving state. I mean, as we're seeing in our world today, love can also be fierce, and demanding changes and demanding justice. Particularly, I'm in the United States where, for us, like, the Black community and those of us that support them are just like, this is enough, right? And this love flows through. And so all this to say what it all comes down to in the end. And you can even see this, like, for me, I grew up Christian. I grew up Southern Baptist, like really, really hardcore Christian. And now for me, I've gone sort of off to the East and now coming back to the Western tradition of mystical Christianity and really trying to reweave and heal my original relationship to the divine, which came to me in this lifetime through the avatar of Jesus Christ, which I feel has been, very much co-opted. But my point with all this is the word Christ means anointed one. It's the same with the Buddha. It's the same with all of these so-called enlightened avatars, their message is always the same. And it's attention and love, attention and compassion. Oh, pay attention and bring in the sense of love. And that is the divine masculine and the divine feminine marriage. And so whatever is arising within the field of my experience, and let me tell you, like, I have gone through every emotion I hope that one person can experience, from the depths of hell to the heights of heaven, and to be able to hold yourself within that with so much grace and kindness, for me, is the meaning of yoga and the meaning of practice and the meaning of enlightenment, or what I like to call, in the words of my friend Jeff Brown, enheartenment. I'm not interested in leaving the planet. I'm interested in being in this body and talking to you, hopefully with some love, and just experiencing the way in which every moment of my life, what is the way in which I'm blocking love. And what typically I find is that I am withholding love to myself. It's really easy for me to love you, but do I love me? And I think that's a really common theme, especially amongst like spiritual people.
Yeah, definitely. That's beautiful. And I'm also curious about your, like, what is divine feminine Ayurveda?
Yeah. I think that, all good medicine is divine feminine Ayurveda. I think the reason we chose to speak about divine feminine is in no way to discount the desperate need we actually have for the divine masculine, right? And so the divine feminine for me is the part that is in all of us that is so deeply connected to her intuitive power, to the power of living spirit inside of her, and to the very natural biological superpower that women have. And it's not to say they always express it, and it's not to say men don't have this, but because of our unique physiology, women's have a Shakti, a power of being able to birth things and to nurture the things that they birth, and to give and give and give. Like we do it with our breasts when we feed babies. We do it on a subtle realm. Many of us do it just all the time, and we don't even realize that we're doing it. We are givers. We are nurturers. And that doesn't mean that there aren't women that are absolutely not like that, but usually that's because of other reasons. But my point here is that our system and our society, it's like a fish swimming in a fish bowl. We don't realize what we're swimming in. Many people don't realize the superpower of the nurturing, loving, kind, giving aspect of the feminine, because it's just what we feel we always deserve. And what I'm encouraging myself and my students to do is to realize how we can turn that faucet that's normally pouring onto everybody else onto our own personal historical experience. And that, I believe, is what will enlighten us.
That's beautiful. And I think one thing, it just came up now when we started talking about the divine feminine, there has been like amongst us that are starting to talk about this more and more. There's sometimes I see that there is a need to excuse ourselves when we're talking about and saying, we have to say that, we honor the divine masculine. But the thing is, it's been so heavily focused. We are already embodying the divine masculine every day, because we live in a society that is so much in its divine masculine, because
in its masculine. It's toxic masculine.
Exactly. Right. There's a lot of toxicity, but there's also like we practice a
Goodness.
lot that is really good too, like
Yeah.
having maybe certain type of structures and routines that are like linear and all of
Exactly.
this is great. But
Yeah.
the thing is, we need to talk about it in this way now
Yeah.
to just awaken, because
Yeah.
even for us, it's like, of course it should be like that. If to us, we take it for granted, but
Right.
when we have this, I remember posting about something, and I was talking about empaths, and I was
Yeah.
saying she is like this, she is like that. But that doesn't mean that it's only a woman. But I'm trying
Right.
to change the linguistics, because in
Yes.
Swedish, we don't say one can feel like this. We say man can feel like this. This is
Wow.
our
Wow.
language. We talk like that. So that's why we're like trying to reprogram the language. So for me, that
Yes.
was important to say it like she and not he, because in this language that I'm talking every day, we always
Yeah.
say man is like this. When man is hungry, man does this. So like that, to me, that's crazy. But or we talk about mankind. So it's not even needed to excuse
Thank
the
you.
fact that
Thank you.
we talk about.
Thank you for giving permission around it, because,
Yeah.
I think, and it's very similar. Like, we live in a time where everyone's trying so hard, at least in our world, to do and say things the right way as to not hurt and do more harm and offend. And of course, I'm one of those people. But at the same time, it's exactly what you're saying. This has been atrophied. This part of our culture has been atrophied for so long that we should proudly stand up and say, you know what? There is an aspect of my being that does not work well with schedules, that does not want to rely, and this goes back to what makes feminine form Ayurvedic different. Well, I don't need to constantly rely on a food list. I don't need to rely on the rules and regulations. The rules and regulations are meant to be guideposts so that you can access your intuitive, earth-based knowing. And if you lose yourself, as I, studied with many masculine Ayurvedic teachers and masculine patterns, and the shadow side to that is it's just like allopathic medicine, right? Like, here's the problem, here's the herb. Here's the problem, here's the food list. No. Did you just go through a heartbreak? Are you working through intergenerational trauma? What's going on in the greater field of the collective consciousness and the planet? And to really deny that field is to deny the feminine. And so what we're attempting to do at Shakti School is say, look, yes, let's eat a vata reducing food list. If it's the season of vata, that might be helpful, especially for beginner people. But more importantly, what is the depth fear that you're encountering right now? And I'm very loose in terms of the rules. Like, my mom, and here's another great example of feminine form Ayurveda. I just went through a very painful heartbreak the past few months. And I just let myself eat as much as I wanted, whatever I wanted, all the time. And I knew I was feeding this really heartbroken little girl part of me. And then all of a sudden, this miraculous thing started to happen because I indulged that little girl. Now the little girl felt safe. She knew I wasn't going to deny her, put her on a diet or anything like that. Now the little girl was like, you know what? I feel like I really want some khichdi. And I just ate khichdi for 3 days. Then I went to my mom's house, and my mom, we're Southern, and my mom made me the most amazing Southern drop biscuits and sausage and eggs, all made with lard, butter. And I'm just like, oh my God, my soul. It's my friend Yolanda was like, honey, that's soul food, right? And this was not Ayurvedically appropriate, right? It's like heavy and dense, and it wasn't organic, and the meat wasn't whatever. And I mean, I'm going to cry just talking, like, my mom made that for me when I was a little girl. So that's feminine form medicine. And I slept like a baby, and I woke up and I had the best bowel movement. You know, it's just, it's so much more complicated than a food list or an Ayurvedic rule. That mother force is what was healing my heart. And that's what I want women to tap into. And, you know, we don't need to sit around eating shitty food all day, right? It's not that we always give in to the indulgent little child, but it's that we have an awareness around the very real truth that during this lifetime, you're going to go through heartbreak, and we need to soothe you in some way.
Thank you for sharing that. That's so important. And it's so, it's all about feeling into the body. And we just talked about this weekend in acupuncture school, that there's nothing that is bad, and there's nothing that is only good. It's all about finding the balance for you. And lard is actually very good in Chinese medicine, but it doesn't have to go to excess. It's like, it can be so nourishing. It's a good type of fat in that modality, which my teacher taught us. So it's like, oh, okay. So it's opening up a new world to me as well.
Right.
But yeah, definitely. But also, on the last thing I wanted to say about this topic as well is that it is a divine feminine thing to not want to be overly like stepping, how do you say it, like going over boundaries, but our boundaries have been overstepped for so long, so it's okay if we step over. It's still a soft way to do it. We're not doing anything crazy. Please let us just use divine feminine, the feminine body, the womb language, like that. It's fine.
Well, I think, Shireen, what's happening, and we need to not be afraid of speaking about this, is because we're experiencing this very beautiful time in our world where gender is really up for question, and we're beginning to see how fluid gender is, and this is wonderful. We're celebrating this, and science supports this. Like, the reality of our world is that there are all these differentiations in the way Mother Nature expresses herself. So we can hold that and hold the beautiful kaleidoscope that is a human individual, right? Like, one of my best friend is a lesbian. The testosterone in her blood, because we've measured it, is way different than mine. I mean, she's like an anomaly, right? She's on that spectrum. Now, that said, we also have biomorphosexuality, meaning Mother Nature in the human body tends to reproduce through the male body and the female body. And that duality of the male body and the female body is most of the time what Mother Nature expresses. And so in that, our biophysiology is completely different than the male body. Our brains are different. The endocrine system, the chemistry of our bodies creates a completely different version of reality, to the extent whereby women who have testosterone therapy, if they're going through a sex change, will be the first to tell you they became macho jerks when they started taking testosterone. They wanted to yell at women. They wanted to stare at their bodies. Like, these chemistries affect our reality. And so within that, to deny that is to continue to deny the feminine experience. And I cannot, like, I must state that the woman's needs as a creator of babies and a nurturer of children and projects and energetics, and a woman who goes through menstruation and menopause, is a very different reality that, for, as you said, so many thousands of years has been denied and negated. Now is the time when we actually have to say, yes, this is our reality, and we do have specific needs and desires because of that biology.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. That was great.
And I'm sure you'll get some hate mail because, you know, that we're living in a time where, you know, no one can really have their own opinion, but I think we have to push back against that.
Yes, I so agree. Thank you so much. And I'm so grateful that you were here and shared all of this. I mean, I can talk to you forever.
I know, we should talk another time, Shreen.
Yes, we have so much. And is there any last thing you want to share about what's coming up now?
Thank
how
you.
can people work with you? Yeah.
Yeah, that's so sweet of you. Yes, I would love for anyone listening, please join us in Shakti School. Our new year starts level 1 this January, and it's a year-long program. We go into anything and everything a woman who is seeking her wholeness could ever want to learn. We have 20 different teachers from all over the world who are the most brilliant, wise women, and that starts in January. And I'm sure we can put some links for you guys in the show notes to be a part of that course. And we also have a monthly subscription that's $18 a month, where for $18 you get to come into my house basically, and you get all of my meditations, all of my body movements, all of my just incredible recipes. And my sister is an Ayurvedic chef, and we share new things every single month. And so if people are like, well, I don't know if I want to do that, the full year of school, we have a monthly program that is really fun, and it's called Love Fit.
Yes, and I'm going to share all of those links in the show notes as well. I really love everything you do, and also want to recommend your podcast, The G Spot.
Yes, the G Spot.
Exactly.
It's a play on
But
words.
I always, exactly, I love that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Shreen. It's been just a total surprise and pleasure to speak with you today.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you so much for being here. I'm sending you so much love.
Oh, I feel it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm so happy that you took your time to be here, and I love this community. So if you want to get in touch with Katie, you can find all of her links in the show notes. And yeah, just let me know how this episode resonated with you, and I would love to hear from you what you would like to know more about, so I can invite other beautiful guests on and just spread the wisdom of all these amazing beings out there. So let's close this episode with a deep breath in through the nose and exhale it out through the mouth. Namaste.